edition of The Desk. I'm your host, Lauren Perry. In tonight's episode, we will cover the history, crime, and politics behind Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files. From his early life to the courtroom, we will take a deep dive with every panel to talk about what we know, what is unanswered, and why it matters. Join us as our panelists share their perspectives and insights into one of the most controversial topics in recent history. Now, come take a seat with us at the desk.
Welcome back to At the Desk. I'm Max Settembre, and I'm going to be giving you a look into the early life of Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was born on January 20th in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in the neighborhood of Seagate, a private gated community in Coney Island. His parents were Pauline Stravosky and Seymour George Epstein. Pauline worked as a school aide, while Seymour worked as a groundskeeper and gardener for the New York Department of Parks and Recreation. Epstein was the older of two siblings, with his brother Mark Epstein being born 1 year later. Epstein attended local public school. Growing up, the first being public school in the Mark Twain Junior High School. During his time at school, Epstein made money by tutoring his classmates. In 1969, Epstein graduated from Lafayette High School at 16 years old after skipping 2 grades. Later that year, he attended advanced math classes at Cooper Union. In 1971, he switched to the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York University, where he continued to study mathematical physiology. He left the school in 1974 without receiving a degree, but the lack of degree was not an issue in Epstein's job search, as 3 months later he got a job as a calculus and mathematics teacher at the Dalton High School. He got the job when he was just 21.
Throughout much of his life, Jeffrey Epstein was an extremely mysterious figure, but 2 things are well known about Epstein. He was extremely wealthy and had connections with extremely influential individuals. But how exactly did Jeffrey Epstein get into such a position of power? How did he go from a middle-class family in Coney Island to managing the money of high-profile billionaires? Well, we look into that question today as we'll be going through the many jobs of Jeffrey Epstein to see how he became as powerful as he did. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
This is a very interesting discussion we're having today, because when you look at Jeffrey Epstein, you think of one thing, sex trafficking, those crimes specifically, but you only look at his professional career. And in his professional career, there's also crimes as well, also bad things he did.
Yes.
But also today we're trying to establish how he got to such a position of power where he committed such, heinous stuff. So we're going through a lot of his jobs today and just kind of seeing how Jeffrey Epstein became the man he did. And we'll start with, you left off about how he got his first job. He got it at the Dalton School. So this guy, he dropped out of college in June of 1974. Flash forward 3 months later, September of 1974, he gets a job at the Dalton School. This is a very prestigious school, by the way. Very expensive, has Ivy League ties. Jeffrey Epstein just suddenly there. How? Well, one thing, he lied on his resume. We'll get to that in his next job. But also, this is an interesting thing. The headmaster at the time was a man named Donald Barr. And he had an interesting approach where he kind of wanted to hire people based on more their potential than their experience. And I thought it was a good question to pose to you guys because, I mean, as college students, wouldn't we want to be hired based on potential? So kind of going into the unknown. So what are you guys' thoughts on that kind of approach of hiring? It obviously did not work out in this sense, but what are you guys' thoughts on it?
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to if the thing is very skills-based, because technically someone is capable of learning. But if you're coming into a position that already needs skills or needs people to know what it is they're actually doing, then you can't just go based on potential.
No, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of it is, I mean, with that skill base, there are certain things that can be taught, but I feel like also there's certain elements in people, you know, like that drive and that passion, you know, those makings to have that power. There's some things that really can't be taught, you know, if you have a little bit of that spark in you. And unfortunately, Jeffrey Epstein had that spark. You know, he was really hungry throughout, you know, a lot of his, you know, personal and professional life. And I think that that is part of the reason as to how he got away with so many things in his life.
Exactly. He pushed for opportunities
Absolutely.
extremely hard.
Always.
And that it's unfortunately how he got to his position of power. So about his career at Dalton School was already plagued. There's already signs when he was a teacher there. He was a calculus and mathematics teacher there. And there are already reports of him being a bit of a creep. There was one official report of him from a student to an administrative staff member, and also a story of him being at a party of some students when they were intoxicated. So there are already signs there, but as unfortunately is the case, he seemed to just slip by a scandal and continue on. And through that, he actually made some connections. There's some powerful parents there. It was a wealthy kids were there.
Yes.
It was a very expensive school to go to, so you only had the wealthiest of people there. One of the people he met there was Ace Greenberg, a senior partner for Bear Stearns, and we're going to go over to Bear Stearns here, Katie.
Yes. So to give a little background on Bear Stearns is a major investment bank which bought and sold securities like stocks, bonds, and commodities. Epstein joined Bear Stearns in 1976 after Ace Greenberg, who actually came in contact with Epstein through a parent at Dalton, who knew of Epstein and sent him over to Ace Greenberg. He was invited to interview at the firm by Ace Greenberg, showed up to the interview in a turtleneck for the major investment bank, and presented the resume that you mentioned earlier. On the resume, he listed things such as saying he was born in 1950, he claimed to have a degree from 2 California schools, and that he lectured under a, quote, Dr. Wolf in the math department at the University of California, Berkeley, all of which were lies. Those are all lies that he listed on the resume and was hired. When this was found out that these were lies on his resume months later, after HR took a look into it, senior executive Michael Tenenbaum, who ended up becoming his supervisor, confronted Epstein and was just like, why did you do this? Epstein blatantly said to him, quote, no one would give me a chance without an impressive resume. So in his normal situation of manipulating higher power, Michael Tenenbaum he felt empathy for Epstein and wanted to give him a second chance and gave him that second chance. And Epstein was able to keep his job. And he stayed working there he started in 1976. He stayed there until 1981, until he was kind of pushed to resign after a few more sets of scandals. But I just wanted to pose the question now. If you were in Michael Tenenbaum's position, would you give somebody of Epstein's caliber a second chance? After all those lies at a major investment bank, would you give him a second chance?
No. I think that you have to uphold certain values as the bank, and any business needs to have a set of values. And the second that you start deviating from that or allowing exceptions, then you're running the risk of putting your own image, your own bank at risk.
I mean, I agree. He's already shown to be untrustworthy in this field. So can you really trust him in further expansions?
Yeah, and even then, you're opening yourself up to, as you mentioned, he was involved in a bunch of scandals. Now you're opening the company up to a bunch of lawsuits and litigation, which is not going to go very well.
I know that Nikolai and we were having a conversation earlier before we came on air. I think part of the reason why he was given this second chance is because he knew kind of what he was doing. He knew, he knew the work well, and he knew how to work this job. And that is part of the reason why he was given a second chance. However, he was taught how to do that work. He was taught how to do these things. You could sit anyone down and teach them how to do this, and he also would know. So, I mean, why really risk it and give him a second chance when it just seemed really unnecessary, honestly?
I agree with all of these points. I also would not be giving him a second chance. If I worked at I think it was, the second largest prime broker in the US, I don't think I would be giving somebody a second chance after opening my company to scandals. Epstein left on March 12th, 1981, when facing a 60-day suspension and a $2,500 fine after providing his girlfriend at the time with access to hot stock trades before they went public. Charging over $10,000 in personal expenses to the company, and making an unauthorized $15,000 personal loan to a high school friend. So through it all, I would not be giving him a second chance, especially after all of the last ones.
And that's a fair assessment.
Yes.
So after this, working for a company, he decided to start his own. He decided to start his own consulting company known as the International Assets Group. And Mason, you have more on that.
Yeah, so after he left Bear Stearns, he ended up founding the Intercontinental Assets Group out of his his one-bedroom New York apartment, officially chartered 27th of August, 1981, and it would last until 1992 when the New York Secretary of State would dissolve it for tax delinquency, of all things. The premise of the company is a little odd. It was marketed as a bounty hunter for capital. Now, so all he was doing is he was going and recovering embezzled or improperly diverted funds, which you figure scandal because he did all that stuff, and now he's helping other people to get that money back. But, and he did this through means of private intelligence, offshore nominees, and then also leveraging kind of the people he had on the inside of all of these stock companies, securities companies, to get account data so he could kind of track where all this stuff was going. The interesting part about this is it was pretty much just him and a secretary. That was all the company was. They relied on a lot of outside investigators, a lot of outside lawyers to take this to the courts. But this is also where he started to meet a bunch of the people that would set him up to become so powerful. I know one of the people he frequently consulted with as part of this group was Stephen Hoffenberg, who was the owner of Towers Financial Corporation. He also met Robert Meister on a flight, got to talking with him, and that's how he came into contact with Leslie Wexner, who was the owner at the time of Victoria's Secret. And that's how Wexner became kind of the sole client, the sole billionaire client of Epstein through Intercontinental Assets Group. And then also he was doing a bunch of other stuff out in foreign countries like Saudi Arabia. He was helping Adnan Khashoggi, major wealthy Saudi arms dealer with the Iran-Contra affair, which was kind of interesting to find out that he was helping, the CIA and all them fund groups out in Iran, which has led to kind of where we are now. But and it's also where he met Robert Maxwell, who was the father of his, who would become kind of his closest supporter, Ghislaine Maxwell. But yeah, it was interesting how the Intercontinental Assets Group was kind of just this small, tiny little company that launched him to where he got to until, he died, until he was arrested.
Yeah.
It's really what kind of embarked him on this social networking journey, because with it, he started to travel more, go around and make all these connections. I'm curious, guys, where do you think he like relied on this international like traveling. Where do you think he would have been if it wasn't for kind of international traveling with international people?
I think honestly, I feel like a lot more of his business and I mean his crimes would have just been more centralized just to Palm Beach, really. I think he would still be doing all of the same things. He would be committing all of the same crimes. It would just be more kind of just condensed to just a localized area, I think, because he had access, to this kind of just international just kind of relations, I think, that just kind of extended his crimes and his business. But I honestly think that it was just kind of a bit of a coincidence. If he didn't have that, I think he would still be the infamous and heinous person that he is today.
Yes, and it's interesting. Most of the people who are facing these punishments right now are people from international countries.
Yes.
One name you mentioned, Mason, was the name of Stephen Hoffenberg.
Yes.
And this is a name which is very synonymous with Jeffrey Epstein when you look at his next endeavor, which Max will be talking about here.
So this was the Towers Financial Corporation. It started not to the same level of corruption that it obviously later leads to. The basic premise of it was that it would buy debts from people on hospitals or banks or phone companies. So it's a thing that purchases debts. Okay. Then Epstein comes aboard with good old Hoffman, and he decides to do something that's called corporate raiding. This is where he basically buys up a ton of stocks, becomes a huge shareholder, then starts outweighing the other shareholders and using it to poach and take away other companies, and he fails twice. He fails with Pan Am World Airways, and that is partially because of the terrorist attempt. But then secondly, he tries the Emory Freight Corps, and that also falls through. So he's not particularly good at it, and meanwhile, he's trucking around the country in Stephen Hoffman's private jet. Then eventually he is starting to get caught under promissory notes to investors, false statements, things that are actually incriminating, and Hoffman does not pull Epstein down. Hoffman takes it to trial. He gets 20 years in prison, and when he comes out in 2013, investigations start opening up again. In 2019, Hoffman says that there's no way he could have told on Epstein because Epstein had traction with the U.S. Justice Department, and he said, you cannot grasp the magnitude of Epstein's controlling effect. So that's concerning. Now, on that note, a question I have for you guys is, if you were Hoffman, would you turn him in? And also possibly, what do you think could be behind these claims from Hoffman that he's literally in with the CIA or FBI?
I mean, it just goes to show his power, really, how
Honestly.
scared he was of him.
Mhm.
When I read that, I thought it was insane, honestly, how this guy, well, according to him, Epstein was kind of like the ringleader kind of thing. He introduced the idea of doing the Ponzi scheme. And yet he didn't say anything until 2019?
Yeah, 2019.
It's insane. Insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know with his ties by this time, he was connected to the British royal family, a little bit to the Saudi royal family, the Saudi arms dealer, obviously, who actually a lot of people think mentored Epstein too, because Khashoggi would take people and then record them with drugs and women and all this stuff. So a lot of people think that's kind of where Epstein picked that up on. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's probably why Hoffenberg didn't mention anything until much later.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably my biggest crazy story learning about Epstein, is that specific, running a Ponzi scheme and getting away with it completely. No charges against him. It's unbelievable.
Keep seeming to slip by everything. Just ridiculous.
It was something, a documentary. It was this guy was able to do things that no other person was able to do.
Yes.
It's mind-boggling. It really is. Well, we have one final company to discuss here today. We got J. Epstein and Company, and Kara's got the word on that.
Yes. So one of his last business endeavors that led all the way up until his death in 2019 was Jeffrey Epstein and Company. This was a financial management and consulting firm. It was founded in 1982 and, like I said, operated up until 2019 when he supposedly died. But we're going to save conspiracies for the crime panel. Managed assets of ultra wealthy individuals. And his main client was still Leslie H. Wexner, which is the founder of L Brands and also owned Victoria's Secret for a while. Everyone knows and familiar with Victoria's Secret, founded in 1977. And L Brands was founded in 1963. And if you want to know just how powerful just of a company, of a corporation that was, it is a net worth of $21.15 billion. So money revenue definitely definitely high. And speaking of revenue, between 1999 and 2018, his company generated $800 million in revenue. So that was kind of the bulk of when they were creating most of their money. Some believe that this business was a potential money laundering front, although that's just a conspiracy and was never really confirmed or denied. But this firm was closely related to the financial trust company based out of the U.S. Virgin Islands, where obviously his island also exists. So.
And that he did it because there's a tax cut.
Yes. Yeah. I think when I was going through and I was watching the documentary, I was kind of talking with my roommates. I think it genuinely got to the point, just kind of going after just like business to business, like Ponzi scheme to Ponzi scheme. It literally got to the point where he had so much money and was so powerful. He fully just created his own business and just slapped his name on it just because he could. And I think that that's really evident here.
It's insane, really.
Yes.
The things he got away with,
Mhm.
the things he did. What was your guys' main takeaway going through this? And look, because this is more of a side we don't usually see. So, what was your main takeaway from this research?
I guess it goes to show don't do multiple illegal things at the same time. One of them is then well,
maybe just don't do illegal things in general as well.
In general,
Absolutely.
but like you're just setting yourself more up for failure by having more things you could fumble.
Yeah, I think it really sets up how much money and power can really pay into a lot of things you can get away with nowadays and throughout history, honestly. Yeah, that was my main takeaway.
I would say just the connections he had, especially after he founded his first company and then his next company, so on, as he starts meeting more and more powerful people, kind of building up this larger chain that allowed him to get away with so many different things, because he could just call somebody and say, hey, I'm in a little bit of trouble. Can you help me? And cleared.
Absolutely. I think obviously just branching off of everyone's points, but I think really the biggest thing that's really evident for me is that there's still a lot of holes in our society. And I think that there's a lot of things that we need to fix because, as you all said, there are a lot of things that power and money can cover up. And I think that it's up to us, as we are now recognizing cases like this moving forward, we need to make that change so that way this doesn't continue to happen.
Yes, well, great things said. Thank you guys so much for being at the panel here today to discuss this. Well, that is unfortunately all the time for History Today at the Desk. Jeffrey Epstein was able to climb the corporate ladder in a way no one else could have. Epstein faced many scandals in his professional career, but always seemed to be able to get out of them. He was able to climb to the upper echelon of society, having astronomical wealth and connection with some of those influential people on the planet. Epstein was able to get himself into a position of power, a position which he used to commit heinous crimes and get away with them. Back to you, Lauren. The year is 2005. During that time, Jeffrey Epstein was living in his mansion in Palm Beach, Florida. In March of that year, a 14-year-old girl confessed to her parents that she was sexually assaulted at Jeffrey Epstein's mansion. While in questioning, the girl told authorities that she was brought there by other girls, and when those two girls were brought into questioning, they mentioned two girls who had done the exact same thing to them. Detectives were able to identify dozens of victims from this, and it was found that the girls that Epstein abused were between the ages of 13 to 16. They were brought into Epstein's mansion by other girls who were promised large amounts of money for doing so. Lawsuits were filed by dozens of victims. In 2006, a Palm Beach grand jury indicted Epstein on one state felony charge of solicitation of prostitution. The Palm Beach Police Department then, however, deferred the case to a nearby FBI department. Fast forwarding to May of 2007, an assistant U.S. attorney submitted a draft indictment outlining 60 criminal counts against Epstein. 2 months later, in July of that year, Epstein's attorneys met with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. The top prosecutor at the time was U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta. The attorney's office offered to end its investigation if Epstein pled guilty to 2 state charges and agreed to accept a prison term. The deal also included a non-prosecution agreement in which the federal government granted immunity to Epstein, 4 conspirators, and any potential co-conspirators. The prosecutors agreed to not tell the victims about the NPA. He was sentenced to 18 months in Palm Beach County Jail. It was not a regular sentence, however, for Epstein, as through the many deals made behind the scenes, he was allowed to leave the prison for 12 hours a day to work at a foundation that he recently incorporated. Epstein was released on July 22, 2009, after serving just 13 months in prison. He would not be arrested again until 10 years later in 2019.
Welcome back to ATD. We are now going to send it over to the crime panel to hear more about trafficking, abuse, and take a look at the Epstein files. Over to you, Kara.
Thank you, Lauren. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here at the crime panel today to further our discussion about the infamous Epstein files, insignia for Jeffrey Epstein himself, along with many others. The files were officially released just a few months ago and included documents collected as evidence in criminal cases against Epstein, and his associates. Names, locations, and even secret code messages were revealed after taking a look at these documents. More importantly, names of victims, countless young women claiming abuse at the hands of Epstein and his associates, some even describing multiple accounts of sex trafficking and an alleged prostitution ring. Most of these secrets spinning out of his private island known as the Little St. James, and we are here to dive into all of that today. I'm so happy to be back with everyone. Miss Koza, welcome to our panel. We're so happy that you're here. Austin, welcome back. So obviously, heavy topics, a lot of things to discuss today. So first, I'm going to throw it over to Miss Sam to start us off.
Yeah, so something that I want to notice is when I was watching, there's an amazing documentary about this on Netflix that just came out. A lot of the victims that spoke up against Mr. Epstein had this very similar story, the same story. And something I want to talk about is how a lot of them came from situations that were not great. You know, some of these girls were abused as children. They didn't have a solid family. And we've learned that a lot of predators kind of take that and run with it. They seek out their victims as being people that are weak, people that need help. Jeffrey Epstein saw these women as people that needed help. He offered them money. He offered them education. He offered them a place to stay. He offered them luxurious vacations, so they would fall into this trap. And we're going to talk about, the sex trafficking and things, but I want to talk about kind of how he used his, intimidation, his power to lure these poor women to his island. And it's just part of, who he was.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. He even had connections with international modeling executives who would lure international models to his island. And then he would kind of say, oh, well, if you come to my island, I will give you a visa. And they need the visa to work and start their careers. So he would use these things as leverage in order to get what he wanted. And the opportunities were endless.
And not only in terms of leverage, not only were the victims themselves, but on many of his residences, he had cameras photographing every single thing that they had, getting a ton of dirt and blackmail upon all of these higher ups that he could later on influence, which might have actually played a part in his sentencing due to his power.
Yeah, and also with cameras, he didn't just, follow around his victims. He followed around the prosecution lawyers. He followed around everyone, the victims' families, lawyers' families. He really used his money, his power to set up surveillance systems on all of these people, which is part of the reason that the investigation was just a mess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we really, he definitely had a pattern. I mean, I feel like he chose all of these girls on purpose because he knew that their past trauma, or like the one, Virginia, she wanted to be a massage therapist, and he used that. And he was well, I have an opportunity for you to get some experience. When in reality, he was just abusing his power, his social status. I mean, I think taking photos with Trump and Hillary Clinton was all just this big master plan so that nobody had any idea what he was doing. I mean, his wife was, his girlfriend was involved. But I mean, and then he provided so many opportunities for these girls. He was like, okay, you don't want to give me massages, then I'll pay you to go bring me other girls. And as we know from the documentary, one of the girls, while she was telling the police what happened, they were basically saying that she was his right-hand man because she was
mad at her, accusing, very accusatory.
But she was like, what about the girl that brought me to him?
Absolutely.
It didn't start at me. What about the one that was paid to bring me to him? And it just shows that this chain of girls that have been brought to him and paid to brought to him is incredibly long. And it goes back years. And unfortunately, Virginia just passed away last year. And it just shows that this effect has a super long lasting effect. This experience of these girls went through will stick with them forever, and it will not leave.
Yeah, I know you wanted to talk about like what happened in those rooms, so you want to do that?
The biggest thing that I wanted to point out that some of you guys have touched on is his MO. And when we were sitting down, I was watching the documentary, it was genuinely almost the exact same story. For every single person, it was literally just copy, cut, and paste every single time. And honestly, I think what was really just bone chilling to me is that this kind of same MO and kind of, repeating the same course of events, I feel like is very representative of a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
I know that allegedly, we're not going to get into too many conspiracies of possible murdering, and things like that today, but I think it really goes to show that this cycle of abuse, as Emily said, it is so hurtful and it is so powerful. I think that there are a lot of things to learn from this case, but I think the biggest thing is that the cycle of abuse, like you said, it's a chain, it's a circle, it just goes back in and of itself. And I think that honestly, in every single victim, some ladies here, Maria Farmers, Annie Farmers, Michelle Licata, every single one of them, I think the lasting effects of abuse like this, not just only sexual abuse, but the abuse of power and money, I think this is basically like a textbook case to learn off of for that.
Yeah, and there was such a power imbalance.
Absolutely.
And, even if these women, the ones that were above age, obviously, consented to do this prostitution and do that, there's really no consent because of the power imbalance. So even if they did consent,
manipulation is not consent.
Yeah,
consent. Manipulation is not consent.
He used this power. He used all these people, these photos. There was no way for these women to consent to him.
No.
Even if they physically said, yes, I consent to doing this, there's still no way that these women could consent to, what they were doing. And I know a lot of these women did not consent. They walked in, they were told they were going to give a massage for money to this man, and then they would massage, he would turn over, and then he would, rape them or, molest them. And that was what he would do over and over and over to all of these different victims. And we can't blame the victims, for coming back. A lot of them did not have money. A lot of them, he paid, upwards of $200 for a short little session.
That's a lot of money if you're 14 years old.
That's a lot of money.
Like a bunch of his victims were runaways, so they probably didn't have money. They probably didn't have someone to tell them this is not right. What he is doing is not okay. And they probably never had a person of that much power in their lives. They were normal teenagers, like cheerleaders on the cheerleading squad, and just normal high schoolers that you find like everywhere, every day. And they're probably like, this is their first experience with a big amount of money. And they're probably like, oh, this is like just normal. Like they probably didn't know any better.
Yeah. So 2 employees who actually worked on the airstrip for Epstein's Island said that they saw Epstein boarding the plane with girls who appeared to be under the age of consent. And many of the employees actually described the girls as children, which is just like totally disturbing.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to note that they said many of the young females were carrying shopping bags for designer labels. So that just represents another way that he was luring them in, manipulating them into thinking that they were going to get everything they ever dreamed of, when really they were just being manipulated the entire time.
And they were just fearful of their lives at that point. Of course, they got all of these false promises, as we mentioned. They got money, they got the luxury bags, but then on top of that, they didn't know what he was capable of. They knew he was a man of power, but they didn't know exactly to what extent that could go. So if they continued to keep going, they'd be in the clear. Otherwise, they would just start.
And as you know, now that a lot of information is coming to light even more, I think we should take a deeper look into the files.
Absolutely.
Which I will go to the board and show some of them. But for those of you watching, some of these images are a little disturbing. So just a little trigger warning.
Yes.
But it felt wrong to do that without doing this.
Little trigger warning, but yes, Emily, please take us over to the board. We would like to jump into some more of these specific files, and you have some photos for us.
I do. So the first photo that you can see on the screen over here is one of Jeffrey's massage rooms. It's disturbing.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of pictures on the walls, I'm pretty sure there was some even not in this specific room. He did not try to hide anything. These photos, And this room fit these girls' stories that they were telling to a T. Everything that they were describing and they were walking the police through is all shown in this photo. And I feel like having these photos on a wall in a room like this just really adds to their stories and adds to like the situation. It really creates an atmosphere. When I walk into that room, I know something's going to happen that I don't want to happen. The next photo from the files is Jeffrey laying on his bed shirtless. If we go to the next one. There we go. We have Jeffrey laying on his bed in his house shirtless, which just shows how comfortable he is and how like just not casual he is with this whole situation. And if you look in the corner, you can slightly see what appears to be a child's foot. The child is not in the photo completely, but it just shows like he's so comfortable around children in his house that he's just willing to lay there and like smile for a photo while he looks to be at least somewhat unclothed. It really just, it adds to a sense of no one can catch me because I have power. And so I'm just going to take these photos. I'm going to have these photos hanging in the room. And when we go to the emails that he sent, now we're going to start getting into some of the emails. He uses very vague language in every single email. I mean, this one says, "Thank you for a fun night. Your littlest girl was a little naughty," which I don't even know where to begin with this. He's very careful about the words he uses. He uses code words so that there's no evidence in any of his emails that show anything of what he was doing. The next one, we talk about pizza, whatever pizza means, but it's just like, if you read the email out loud, you mean radiating a soft glow with the equals look of bliss and excitement. Yeah, that's the pizza. It's very confusing. It doesn't make sense. It's clearly not written for someone to understand that isn't close to Jeffrey. I mean, when you read that, it just makes no sense. It's like a bunch of letters on an email, and it really shows that he has something to hide, but nobody was looking into it because he didn't use any super specific words. They were all vague and things that like wouldn't get flagged in an email, like foods and just little things like that. So that was 4 of the files. I know that there's still a bunch more to discuss, but we can start with that.
Yeah, Emily, thank you very much for that. Thank you for walking us through that. One thing that I would like to kind of shift everyone's attention and focus to is something that you said, is that as an example, looking at the photo of his massage room, you have those very suggestive view of those naked photos hanging up in that room, and also reports that photos like that were hanging up all throughout the house. And then you have the photo of him laying, shirtless on his bed. I mean, just posing unclothed, for which, assuming, he is a person of power, any photo you take could be a public photo. You never know, especially in that position. And then with a child's foot, in the background, as you said, he is very, very chalant about this.
Yeah.
And in his house, in his personal and his supposed private space, he is not trying to hide this at all. But then I think that behavioral shift, when you look over at his emails, like you said, then it gets very secretive. It gets, everything, like you said, these secret code messages, everything gets really secretive. And I kind of just want to talk about a little bit of that kind of like behavioral shift where he's in his home. This is where he is abusing these girls. This is where he is kind of at the forefront of his power. But then, as you said, he's still very sophisticated about it because he's trying to hide his tracks kind of with his email. So I kind of want to just talk about these little things that really showcase manipulation of his power.
I mean, he's clearly a narcissist. He's not afraid to take photos of himself unclothed right next to a child.
Right next to a child,
which
not
is
a care in the
very
world.
Suggestive in and of its own. But also, he's so confident in himself and his abilities that it's almost like he doesn't care. He doesn't care who sees these photos. No. He doesn't care who sees these photos on his wall because he's probably thinking in his mind they're just photos.
Yeah, and he believes that he is above the law. Yes. And I think with this investigation, it kind of pushed that into a reality because, all these victims were coming out. The FBI was on the case. But then once someone met with, once the U.S. attorney in this case met with Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers, suddenly the case was stopped being investigated.
Suddenly, where it was very, very hard hitting. It was like everyone was saying this man is going to go away for life, and then all of a sudden, what's the details on the case? Yeah. Actually, we're not really sure anymore. Complete switch up.
And FBI agents that were investigating this case were very upset about this.
Absolutely,
they were crying. She said in one of her, statements that just one count of what she was posing would put him away for life.
Because he got no federal charges.
They have so much evidence. And I want to go back to the code words before we wrap up, because we see this a lot with, pedophiles, sex trafficking, all of that. Pizza, the word pizza was seen over 900 times in these files. There was no photos of pizza.
No.
They're not having, luxurious pizza parties for all these people.
And that wasn't the only code word. They had cream cheese.
Yeah.
They use so many different food code words.
And they're just using random sentences.
It's insane.
And, pizza is, rumored to be, girl, meaning girl, hot dog means boy, cheese means little girl, ice cream means male prostitute. That was used over 673 times. Baby and cream cheese were used in the same sentence. Just little things like that just makes your stomach turn. And these are code words that are still used, in the dark web and things to this day.
Some of these rumored pizza parties are still kind of circulating around in society with celebrities.
And
today.
as we saw, in the email that I read aloud, they don't make any sense in the sentence. They're just thrown in there.
They don't fit the context whatsoever.
No.
So it leads us to believe, what could they possibly mean? We probably don't want to know what it possibly means.
No, I know.
Because I'm sure it's very disturbing.
Going into a little bit of my own research as well, there were some emails that the subject of the email was, of course, the name is redacted. It goes, does redacted need to bring anything from New York? And then the response was, yes, Jeffrey's favorite kind of ice cream.
Yeah.
No one's
we're not sending that in.
He's a billionaire.
Yeah.
He could get ice cream whenever he wants.
He could snap. No, he's not just a billionaire. He could snap his fingers and have 5 different people bring him 5 different types of ice cream.
And nobody wanted to say anything. During the documentary, they called 3 of his employees, and they were like,
every single one of them were
we
scared
can't
to
talk
speak up.
about that.
I mean, it's still now because he still holds so much power.
Yeah.
All of these people,
and he's supposedly dead, and he is still holding on to his power.
Still holding on to this power, and I just I'm very, hurt by law enforcement, how they handled this situation. I mean, there were people that had a real, negative, intent with how they were handling this. There were some people that were, investigating it, saying, I'm going to give, these victims what they deserve and all of that. But in reality, he has so much power. And that's just the problem with our justice system today.
He still has power. There's still probably thousands of victims that don't want to say anything.
And the fact that he was a registered offender and he was still bringing all of these girls onto his island, local enforcement, they didn't intervene. They didn't question him.
Like you said, they saw him taking these girls on his plane, and they were just like, bye.
And some of this was actually while he was serving his jail time, because he was able to get excuses.
Because he could just leave.
On parole, there was photos of him, flying all these different places. And I mean, it was just
You might as well reward him. They basically were just rewarding him and just allowing him to do this behavior. And it was just if anybody else had done that, it would have been life in jail.
It was Jeffrey Epstein, he had power. He was connected to all these, Prince Andrew, the Clintons, he had power. And, that's a reason that we're still talking about it to this day.
Definitely.
I think as something very interesting is I want to kind of obviously circle back to the victims. I feel like it is really easy, especially if you were not in a situation, to say, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you say no?
They were scared.
Why didn't you just stand up and just walk away? And I think it really speaks to that abuse of power. You're 14 years old. You're in a room with an adult who is an authority figure that is hard to say no, hard to turn away from. But Sophia and Austin, I want to hear from you guys first. What do you have to say to those people who are like, why did these girls say no? Why didn't they go and tell someone sooner?
Well, I think it's important to note that the girls that were on the island, they were trapped. They were isolated. He owned the whole island. Actually, according to a lawsuit, one 15-year-old victim allegedly tried to escape by swimming. She jumped off the island and tried to swim in the ocean. But obviously, that's not going to work. There's no police station that they can run to. So you cannot blame them when you're never in that situation. You don't know what you would do, especially feeling so trapped. It's just such a scary situation to be in.
Absolutely.
And
and there were so many threats as well that Epstein and his other colleagues, I guess you could call them, would put out. I know, also going back to that documentary, I know that there was one person that found like a bullet on their front doorstep.
Front doorstep, I did see that.
And the
as well,
sheep
yes.
head or something like
Yeah,
on
so-
the wall.
It was a cat. It was a cat head,
Yeah,
and they're
it was
guarding
severed cat head.
those threats.
And
So-
even verbal intimidation too. You're going to go nowhere without me. You know, you're going to have no
Exactly.
career.
Mhm.
I mean,
It all goes back to his power. At the end of the day, they were
Yeah.
fearful for their lives, and they were
Absolutely.
fearful of what they wouldn't be able to do.
If I walked into a room with those photos on the wall, I don't think I would leave. I'd be scared.
You don't know how you would react in that situation unless
Yeah.
Exactly.
you were there.
One victim even said that he strapped a gun to the bedpost and locked the door. Those levels of intimidation, imagine being 14, 15 years old.
Mhm.
You would freeze. You don't know what you would do.
Yeah, that is very true. That is all of the time that we have for our discussion today. Thank you guys so much for all of your points. That is all the time that we have for discussion today. As I have said, currently 36 victims in this case have been identified in Florida alone by just the year 2005. Officials suspect a much higher, truer number after subsequent lawsuits in 2020 have brought numerous other accusers forward. Some believe the number to be more than 1,000 young women and children, all abused at the hands of Epstein and at his island. The site of many of these heinous crimes was transferred into trust after his death and remains abandoned to this day. Even though these victims never quite got the justice they deserved with a fair trial against Epstein, speaking out in us today, sharing their stories is the least we can do to remind everyone that it is okay to speak up and speak out and get help because no one deserves to be a victim. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you to the crime panel for educating us on the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and sharing your insights on multiple aspects of the case. Now it's time for us to take some quick coverage on how the Epstein files are being handled overseas. Over to you, Ryan.
While the United States struggles to sift through the Epstein files, Europe is where the arrests are being made. In Britain, former Duke of
Whoever's
York,
on the
Prince Andrew, was
teleprompter-
arrested
Yo,
along with
whoever's
former
on the
US
teleprompter
ambassador
needs to like
under the
slow.
offense of misconduct in public office. Neither have been charged with any wrongdoing yet. Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, has been found to have a long history with financier and child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, with victim Virginia Giuffre saying that she was trafficked to Andrew from Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. In recent years, Mr. Mountbatten Windsor was stripped of his royal titles. In Norway, former Prime Minister Torbjørn Jagland was charged with gross corruption for his relationship to Epstein. Emails found that he stayed in Epstein's houses in New York, Florida, and at his private island. Mona Jewel, Norway's ambassador to Jordan, also resigned after it was revealed that Epstein left $10 million in his will towards her children. In France, investigations are also underway into former culture minister Jack Lang and his financial ties to Epstein, which he denies. These revelations, among many others about Europe's elite and the subsequent ousting of these leaders, shows the difference in the handling of these files compared to the United States, where few have been punished or arrested for their connections to Epstein. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Ryan. Now we will finally head to the politics panel to discuss the scandal's prevalence over American politics. Over to you, Gracie.
Thanks, Lauren. Welcome back to a special episode of our politics panel, where we will be analyzing financier and child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and the dominance his story continues to have over American politics. In the last week, we have seen both former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testify before the House Oversight Committee to defend their ties to Epstein and his partner, Ghislaine Maxwell. We will be discussing these recent testimonies along with Pam Bondi's House Judiciary Committee hearing. Our panelists today will also tackle Epstein's connections to the U.S. government and its officials and the elitism among our political class that comes with it. Now, Sam, let's start with you. What do you think of this case and how our government has been handling it?
It is an utter disgrace that a politics panel is talking about a crime that went on for, still going on for now roughly 30 years. I think this may be one of, if not the first time, that so many government agencies in our government system have been tied to a case like this. If you look at it, it is a local government that's tied to it. You have local, state, and federal, executive, legislative, judicial. You have the CIA, the FBI, and police, local and state police, all tied to a case like this. It is simply a disgrace. It has been something that has been messed up time and time again. And now it was the Trump's administration time to fix and right all the wrongs that were done from past attorney generals, past attorneys, past lawmakers, and they were unable to do it. At the end of the day, it's simply just a disgrace.
I mean, yeah, all the way down to Pam Bondi's hearing a couple weeks ago, that really stood out to me because it was just kind of highlights how poorly the administration has handled this scandal. She was there with a book and kind of felt like Donald Trump himself privately coached her on how to handle the testimony, because she was just attack. Any congressperson that tried to ask her a question, she would call them a loser or bring up their stock investments or bring up how the what was up 50%?
The Dow was up 50,000.
Yeah. I'd like to remind everyone that the role of the attorney general is not to serve as the personal kind of general, or not general, but
the lawyer
consigliere for the president. It is supposed to be an independent agency that tries to serve justice on behalf of the American people, and the American people want justice for these survivors, and they want responsibility within our government to go out and find out who was a part of this and prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And really, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing we have to remember about this is that, we're a politics panel, but there were crimes that were committed, yet this has been turned into nothing but political theater on both sides for, over how many administrations there was crimes committed and there was not justice found, and it was not carried out because of people who may have been involved. And now we're seeing because of partisan fighting. And so the biggest thing that we need to be focused on is not, oh, well, did this party do this? Did this party do this? It needs to be, how can we find justice? How can we, end this case in a way that we're able to hold those accountable that committed crimes? And I think this kind of flip-flopping where both sides are attacking each other over this needs to end, and it needs to be focused more on, finding out the truth of the matter, who was involved, who in the government, whether they're public officials or private individuals, who was involved, and how can we hold them accountable?
Yeah, I think ultimately we can all agree that there has been a massive deflection on behalf of so many people in power that is just an absolute slap to the face to not only the victims themselves, but just to the American people who really just want answers. I think that the further exploration of different depositions and specifically like going into the Trump administration will be something that we can examine further and talk about how these deflections are ultimately going to impact Americans.
I mean, it's interesting that Justice Department, when I think a couple weeks past the deadline, they were supposed to start publishing files according to the Transparency Act, which just makes me wonder, what were they doing for all those months, for the first 10 months or so of the administration, where everyone's talking about Epstein and things are slowly leaking about Epstein? What is going on inside the Justice Department? Where they weren't working on redacting names or getting it right? Because every time there's a new release of files, they accidentally release something they didn't mean to, bring it back, and then put it back out there. A lot of those are related to Donald Trump. I mean, NPR, you've mentioned this before, Gracie. Yes. 50 pages or so of an allegation made to the FBI against Donald Trump raping a 13-year-old girl. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I want to get into, because if this was really a bipartisan issue, there wouldn't be so many redactions in these files. It's sick. It's terrible. Especially, you can't just take stuff out of these files. That is unlawful. That's wrong. They're not allowed to do that. That's illegal. And going back to these NPR pages, the FBI brought this young girl in for 4 interviews. If they thought that she was not a credible witness, they would have not brought her back for that many times. And the things that she said were just sickening. She started by saying that her and another 12-year-old girl had to orally copulate President Trump. And when they were done, he pushed them away and told them they did a bad job. These are 12 and 13-year-old little girls. And this is our president of the United States. And they're trying to hide this information. The American people want justice. They're not fond of dishonesty, and they're not fond of child predators either. And then on her last occasion, she said that Donald Trump tied her to a bed. This 13-year-old, well, she was 13 13 years old at the time. And she said that Trump tied her to a bed and that she screamed and pleaded for him to use a condom. And he told her that he'll do whatever he wants. And then at the end, she said, "What if you got me pregnant?" And he threw money on her and said to go get an effing abortion. This is our president of the United States. And this is the information that the Department of Justice is trying to hide. This is unacceptable.
These are just accusations right now, obviously. I mean, they asked her 4 times about it, but even if they are just accusations, these are the type of accusations in any other presidency will bring it all crashing down.
Yes, I cannot believe that this has fallen into the 24-hour news cycle. It's ridiculous. This would end a presidency, or at least be a major scandal within it.
Well, I think the bigger issue, that is a horrible issue, but this goes back years to the failures of FBI going into the 1990s when the first victims of, well, not the first victims, but the first outspoken victims went to the FBI in New York and put in a tip, and they said, "We'll handle it." And they did nothing. And then then Palm Beach had an entire investigation on him. We have here the police raided his house. Michael Ryder was the police chief at the time in Palm Beach. He said he had a full investigation ready to go to convict Jeffrey Epstein. And then Palm Beach, who was the person who was the attorney in Palm Beach, was Barry Krischer. And at first, before he met with Epstein's lawyers and his team, he was like, "We're going to get him. We're going to get him behind bars." And all of a sudden, he met with his team and he said, "We didn't have a case." Same thing happened with Alex Acosta with the U.S. He was one of the attorneys. Same thing. They picked up the case as a federal government. Same thing. He said they had a case. He met with them. And then all of a sudden they didn't have a case anymore. So yes, it is a disgrace on the FBI and the DOJ for not releasing the information about our own president of the United States currently. But there's just more. It's more than just a Donald Trump issue. This is a complete cover-up of a federal agency in our government. How can you trust anything when all we have, this is one example of an anonymous tip from a bunch of other women and young children in this country going to the FBI. Who are you supposed to go to anymore? And to your point, it is actually, it shouldn't be anything about politics. It just happens to be that they're covering it up. But there's been other cover-ups with people. I don't care your party, and I don't care. This isn't politics. This is called justice.
And after Acosta let off Epstein with the sweetheart deal, he was nominated by Trump 6 years later for labor secretary.
Right.
And that goes back to that political elitism and just the politics where there should not be. It's disgusting.
I mean, Howard Lutnick is our current Secretary of Commerce, and he admitted to taking his family to Epstein's island. His family, including his children. This is a person currently in power.
Yeah, I will say, though, it's interesting because Lutnick recently said he's willing to testify before Congress and has said that he has, like, nothing to hide, essentially. So I think that that's an interesting point to bring up because, there have been people that have been kind of deflecting any sort of accountability or involvement within Epstein, but there's also people, I mean, even Trump himself has been pushing for the Epstein files to be released and clashing heads with Pam Bondi herself. So I think that there's a struggle, like regardless of party, about the transparency. And I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Especially because Lutnick lied about it at first and said that he was with Epstein once and it freaked him out so bad that he was done. But then it came out that he brought his family there after Epstein was convicted.
Right. I mean, and now he's going to go and testify in front because another picture came out with him on the island. His kids and family was not in sight in that picture. But to the point of all these depositions, you bring in the Clintons, which is political theater. You have Alex Acosta that testified in September. You had Lex Wessner testify, and the Republicans on the Oversight Committee didn't even show up. His little right-hand man, practically, who got him into this power, the person who honestly increased his trajectory into where he got. And you don't show up for this. It's political theater time and time again. And at this point, and I'll ask you, Tristan, at what point do we stop bringing in people for a deposition and testifying when we're not getting any answers? Acosta came in and he said, to this day, he doesn't have any knowledge if there was abuse with Epstein. Clinton, he just happened to be in a hot tub with a random girl, and he happened to be friendly, but fly on his plane 29 times. Hillary Clinton didn't know anything about Jeffrey Epstein, although Ghislaine Maxwell was at her daughter's wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at what point are we going to go into these depositions and go, someone has to know something, so we might as well stop doing them?
Well, I mean, it just goes to show you kind of why the American people have lost faith in their institutions, because whether it's the FBI investigating it, whether it's Congress who are doing these subpoenas, doing these depositions, and then not really doing anything with the information that they're gathering or holding anyone accountable, it goes to show, like, you know, why are the American people disillusioned with the government? Why are they seeking out other options? And why do they kind of see it as completely failing them time and time again over the past 3 decades, as you mentioned? And I think the biggest part about this is also you look at, you know, Alex Costa, who said, oh, well, I dropped the case because I was told that it's above my pay grade and he's involved in intelligence. And that goes to show, is there more involved in this within the United States government? You know, is our intelligence agencies, were they aware that Epstein was doing this and then just proceeded to not turn over that information to the FBI to hold them accountable? Are people being protected? And that's something that we need to have investigations into. Otherwise, the American people are never going to regain faith into their government.
Yes. And I think the big problem is a lot of people are just kind of checked out mentally. Everyone knows about Epstein. Everyone knows about the heinous crimes he's committed, but it's been so long and it keeps getting, I guess, watered down to the point, like with these files, it's just information overload. You get all this information, you can't really put the pieces all the way together. It makes some sense, but then you get all these independent journalists that kind of try to make their own inferences based off what they're reading, and people listen to that. And if anything, the result of this is just going to be more misinformation for people and less justice for survivors.
Well, and let's be clear, I've never seen a case with so much information lasting for so long, involving some of the highest level of people in the world. Mm-hmm. And yet again, nobody knows anything. That just doesn't make any sense. And to your point with the files, you know, you said, like, why wasn't Pam Bondi ready? This goes beyond Pam Bondi. Why wasn't anyone organizing these files before this? Why is it just a slew of unscattered data? Why aren't the investigators who FBI, you know, people pay taxpayer money to fund these organizations. Why aren't they doing their job in something so serious like this? What's the point of, brushing it under the rug?
Well, yeah, he was arrested in 2019, and you've seen now, Trump 1, Biden, and Trump 2 now come in, and there is nothing that's been done. There was no charges brought against anyone else besides, Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell. And it's like, clearly there's other people that are involved in this situation. And you have these millions of documents over the past 7 years, and people aren't, getting charged. There aren't even investigations really being opened. It was just no one's involved. And now we've seen through the release of documents, there were other people involved.
And I feel like we'll never get to the bottom of this as long as Republicans are doing what they're doing with these depositions. They didn't show up, like you said. They didn't show up to Les Wexner's
right. They didn't show up to his deposition, but at the same time, as much as I agree that there is some cover up with the Trump administration, I'm not going to say that this is fully on the Republicans. This is a both-sided issue.
It's a lot, especially because why wasn't Howard Lutnick brought in already? What about Melania? She's in the files. Hillary Clinton was not mentioned in the files. And then when she gets to her deposition, Lauren Boebert is asking her about Pizzagate. Yeah. Are you kidding me? It's a joke to the American people, and it's offensive to the survivors who are waiting for justice.
I mean, speaking of the survivors, like back to that Pam Bondi testimony, there was just this picture that really just sums up this whole fiasco of them asking asking the survivors, one of the congressional members, whether they've reached out to the FBI and whether they were ignored. And for when they were ignored, they all raised their hands, and Pam Bondi refused to turn around and look.
Even look at that.
Vita, can I ask you a question? I just thought of here. We have DOJ who's nominated or appointed. You have the FBI who gets appointed. Everyone in these higher level things, attorney generals get appointed or voted on. At some point, do you think it's a failure of our system rather than just the people in place?
I mean, absolutely. I think we're looking at countries like Britain, France, Norway that are taking action and arresting people that have been appearing numerous times in these files that have had a far smaller role than a lot of the people that we're talking about today. And I mean, in my opinion, that's the actions that should be taken by the FBI, by the DOJ, taking actual initiative and showing the American people, we're putting your trust and your loyalty before anything else and before any sort of relationship that could benefit the current administration. I think that's what people want to see. And I mean, as much as it is, we don't want to make it a political thing. I think, to Gracie's point, the current administration is the Trump administration. Obviously, all eyes are going to be on them. There's going to be more pressure to hold the Trump administration accountable. I think it would be the same Democrat or any other party that that is currently in power. So, I mean, as much as we want to teeter away from that, I think that's the truth.
Yeah. And like other countries have been taking initiative. Prince Andrew was arrested. A former UK ambassador to the US was arrested. And our president is in the Epstein files more than God in the Bible and more than Harry and the Harry Potter books. I just feel like that needs to be said again and again and again. We're not doing anything about it.
So do you think that President Trump should testify before Congress?
I do.
But here's my point on this, which I was getting back to, which I was just about to say. You have people that are swearing and testifying that they're going to tell the truth. We just saw Bill Clinton come in, which clearly he wasn't just friendly, he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. You've had Alex Acosta, who all of a sudden had no knowledge of abuse. You bring in Trump in front, he's going to sit there and he's not going to say anything. So at some point, it's like I'm saying about these depositions, we can interview people until, like Hillary says, until the cows come home. But at some point, what is this doing? Why don't we have our Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Justice, going through the stuff and actually going and getting the information instead of having people testify and they're allowed to basically spew whatever they want. All of a sudden, Bill was looking through the files and he was having a little stroll down memory lane with a couple of the photos. There's a bunch of people tied to it, but these depositions aren't doing anything besides political theater.
I mean, I think we also all have to keep in mind that Jeffrey Epstein was able to be successful in this and have all this power because he was so protected by billionaires and people that were in power that, kept everything hush hush. I think to want justice entirely, I mean, it seems at this point unattainable in the current climate.
And you were asking about this, it's a systemic problem. These kind of super rich, elite, transnational kind of men who act like because they can fly on private jets or go to private islands, they are outside the realm of the law. And they all are able to somehow protect each other, lying under oath. They're not telling the truth. And these systems set in place have only have gone to show that these people in power, these criminals, these pedophiles, will always protect each other no matter what.
And the criminals are redacted in the files. They should not be redacted in the files. Meanwhile, you have young girls who were on the DOJ website for too long in introducing themselves unredacted. These survivors agreed on terms that they would be protected to give this information. And they were lied to. It was a slap in the face to them. It's wrong. And that goes back to that elitism, this billionaires being protected always. It's
right. And it goes back to our justice system. Jeffrey Epstein got a slap on the wrist in 2008. He got this sweetheart deal. He got to go home every day. It was like going to a 9 to 5, got to do whatever he wanted. He didn't even have to go on the registry. And then, whatever happens, Ghislaine Maxwell is chilling in prison. And, I wouldn't be shocked if this administration all of a sudden, she's trying to get a deal where if she tells what she knows, which she'll know nothing, she can get out of jail. Like at some point, I've heard other panels talk about this. If this was any other person in the United States, they would be behind bars and go to jail for 5 lifetimes.
Well, back to that, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers had the 302 files from the girl who testified for crimes when she was 13. Her lawyers had information that could potentially it could end Trump's presidency. So I think that is why she's getting this sweetheart deal and why things are looking so up for her, because she has information.
And another billionaire in Trump's circle, Elon Musk, he was in those files practically begging to come to the parties. He said he wanted to go the wildest ones they had. And they didn't even seem interested in him.
A big part of this is the failure of like the congressional oversight system, because you have these small number of representatives and a small number of senators, and they're supposed to oversee all of the FBI, all of the CIA, all of these agencies, the DOJ, the executive, and it's kind of impossible, especially when a lot of them are supported and backed by some of the same billionaires that they're supposed to be holding accountable. How many, congressional campaigns did Les Wexner fund? And you saw that Jeffrey Epstein, we saw in the files, was directly texting the delegate from the Virgin Islands on what questions to ask during House Oversight Committee meetings. And so it's like, if you have representatives that are being controlled like that, then how are we supposed to have oversight?
We won't.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. The case of Jeffrey Epstein is not going away anytime soon. With each new file released, we are left with more questions than answers, and we hope that one day the truth is brought to light, and those within our political system who have illegal ties to Jeffrey Epstein will be fully prosecuted. Next week, we'll discuss Trump's strikes in Iran and how Jeffrey Epstein predicted the war in a text chain from 2018. Back to you, Maureen.
Thanks, Gracie. As much as we'd like to continue, we are out of time. We hope you learned more about Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files, as well as the implications they have worldwide. Thank you for tuning in to this special edition of ATD. We hope you enjoyed the show. Stay updated with ATD on all of our socials at PSU at the desk, and let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Lauren Perry, and we will see you back at the desk next week.